In February 1945, the 21st Army Group, commanded by Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, launched two large-scale offensives to clear the Rhineland in western Germany. The first, known as Operation Veritable, was launched on the 8th of February by the Canadian First Army, which smashed its way through the German defences in and around the Reichswald Forest, and then pushed in a southeasterly direction towards the town of G.O.C, which it captured on the 21st. 2 days later, on the 23rd of February, the second offensive opened in the south, where the American 9th Army launched Operation Grenade. Crossing the River Rhine at 4 points, the 9th advanced northwards against minimal opposition, and on the 3rd of March 1945, it linked up with the Canadian First Army near the town of Geldern. By the 11th of March, all German resistance between the Reichswald and the Ruhr had ceased, and the 21st Army Group took up position along the western bank of the River Rhine. It was the crossing of this major river that became the Army Group's next priority, and on the 9th of March, as the Rhineland campaign was drawing to a close, Field Marshal Montgomery issued an outline plan for the crossing of the Rhine. Codenamed Operation Plunder, this plan called for the 21st Army Group to assault across the river on a frontage of two armies. On the left, the British Second Army, commanded by General Miles Dempsey, and which had up until now been in Army Group Reserve, was to conduct the main effort and force the river between Reyes and Wesel, prior to pushing north in the direction of Bocholt. On the right, the American 9th Army, commanded by General William Simpson, was to carry out another crossing in the vicinity of Rheinberg, with the primary aim of protecting the right flank of Second Army and developing operations towards the town of Dorsten. Once the initial ground assault had been made, the American 18th Airborne Corps, commanded by General Matthew Ridgway and consisting of the British 6th and the US 17th Airborne Divisions, was to drop behind enemy lines in the vicinity of Hamminkeln as part of Operation Varsity. The task of the airborne troops was to facilitate the expansion of the bridgehead on Second Army's front and support the breakout into northern Germany. Interestingly, a 3rd Airborne Division, the American 13th, was originally earmarked to participate in Varsity, but at the last minute it was removed from the order of battle due to insufficient transport aircraft. With the formalisation of this plan, the 21st Army Group set in motion a large-scale concentration of men and equipment on the western bank of the Rhine, the likes of which had not been seen in the Northwest European theatre since the invasion of Normandy back in June of 1944. In Second Army's sector alone, over 3,400 artillery pieces, 118,000 tons of supplies, 2,291 tanks, 2,650 boats, 32,000 soft-skin vehicles, and 22,000 tons of bridging equipment were assembled. In addition, the Allied air forces carried out an unrelenting bombing campaign to soften up the enemy defences, whilst the US and Royal Navies provided various landing craft types to support the crossings. On the eve of the offensive, the 21st Army Group contained over 1.2 million men, of which 750,000 were British and 330,000 were American. By the 23rd of March 1945, the build-up had been completed, and after assessing the available weather reports, Field Marshal Montgomery at 15:30 gave the green light for Operation Plunder to begin. The following is part of a message he issued to the troops under his command. 21st Army Group will now cross the Rhine. The enemy possibly thinks he is safe behind this great river obstacle, but we will show the enemy that he is far from safe behind it. This great Allied fighting machine, composed of integrated land and air forces, will deal with the problem in no uncertain manner. The swifter and the more energetic our action, the sooner the war will be over. Over the Rhine then let us go, and good hunting to you all on the other side. May the Lord mighty in battle give us the victory in this our latest undertaking, as he has done in all our battles since we landed in Normandy on D-Day. At 1700 on the 23rd of March 1945, one of the heaviest artillery bombardments of the war commenced, as the 3,400 artillery pieces of the British Second Army opened fire against the eastern bank of the Rhine. 4 hours later, at 2100, whilst the artillery continued to pound the German defences, Second Army's ground assault commenced. On the left, the British 30th Corps, commanded by Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks, crossed the Rhine at Reyes with the 51st Highland Division up front. Initially, the division encountered only light enemy resistance, so that by dawn on the 24th of March, a small bridgehead on either side of Reyes had been gained. However, from mid-morning onwards, German resistance, in the form of the 8th Fallschirmjäger and 15th Panzergrenadier Divisions, began to steadily increase, and at 0800 a counter-attack drove the British out of the hamlet at Spelldrop. Not long afterwards, at 0900, the 51st Highland Division would suffer its greatest loss of the operation, when its commander, Major General Thomas Rennie, was sadly killed by an enemy mortar as he visited his forward troops on the eastern bank. Aged just 45 years old, General Rennie was regarded as one of the most capable and experienced British divisional commanders of the war, with Colonel Berenger Bradford, the commanding officer of the 5th Battalion the Black Watch, later recalling that there was never anybody quite like Thomas Rennie, who was the most accessible and least pretentious of generals, of whom every officer and man could boast as a friend. He had an impish sense of humour and a cheerfulness which was proof against every crisis or disaster. His courage was far beyond the ordinary. There wasn't a jock in the division who did not know his duffel-coated figure. The loss of General Rennie was thus a massive blow to the 51st Division, and to ensure that morale didn't drop at a crucial point in the offensive, news of his passing was not relayed to the forward troops until a few days later. In the meantime, Brigadier James Oliver assumed temporary command of the division, and for the remainder of the 24th of March, the main focus of the 51st was on clearing the town of Reyes. Here, stubborn resistance by German paratroopers, combined with roadblocks, mines and craters, made the clearance process difficult, and by evening, only the northern and western approaches into the town had been cleared of enemy troops. Meanwhile, a few kilometres downstream, the British 12th Corps, commanded by Lieutenant General Neil Ritchie, carried out 2 more crossings on the right flank of 2nd Army. The first was launched at 2200 on the 23rd of March and involved the 1st Commando Brigade crossing the Rhine at a point just west of Wesel. On reaching the far bank, the brigade formed up on the outskirts of Wesel and observed the Royal Air Force's Bomber Command carry out a precision bombing raid against the town at 22:30. Brigadier Derek Mills Roberts, the brigade commander, later recalled, "We saw the Pathfinder aircraft of Bomber Command drop their red flare markers over the town. These were followed a few seconds later by 200 Lancaster bombers, each with a double blockbuster load. As the bombs dropped, showers of debris flew into the air, accompanied by great banks of fire. The noise was colossal, and the ground shook under us. The whole plain was illuminated by a red, lurid glow." The moment the last bombers cleared the target area, the 1st Commando Brigade advanced into Wesel itself, and by the following morning the commandos had secured the northern suburbs of the town, having encountered very little in the way of enemy opposition. That said, patrols pushed out into the southern part of town bumped into small groups of German infantry, and it was at midday on the 24th that elements of the 116th Panzer Division began to probe the brigade's defensive line from the northeast. Fortunately though, heavy and accurate British artillery fire disrupted any attempt by the Germans to mount a major counter-attack to retake Wesel, and in the evening of the 24th, the 1st Commando Brigade reported that it was in complete control over the entire town. Several hours after the commando assault, the second crossing conducted by 12th Corps was launched at 0200 on the 24th of March, and was executed by the 15th Scottish Division. Although a swift advance inland was achieved on the division's right, where the German 84th Infantry Division was forced out of Bislich at 0700, difficulties were immediately faced over on its left, where some of the assaulting troops were not only touched down at the wrong points, but they also found that the riverbanks in the area were extremely muddy, meaning that it took some time before the troops set off for their assigned objectives. When they did start moving inland, however, a spirited defence by the 7th Fallschirmjäger Division made progress slow, and it wasn't until the mid-morning that the 15th Division succeeded in driving the enemy from the area of Lorkerhof, Hubsch and Wolfskaff, after which heavy fighting developed at Lauren Overcamp. It was in the midst of the fight to secure these 2 hamlets that suddenly, at 0950 on the 24th of March, the drone of aircraft engines could be heard above the 15th Division, as 1,696 transport aircraft and 1,348 gliders carrying the American 18th Airborne Corps flew northeast towards Hamminkeln, marking the start of Operation Varsity. This great air armada, one of the largest to have been assembled in history, had taken off from airfields in eastern England and northern France starting at 0700, and it was at 0950 that the first airborne troops began to drop east of the Rhine. Around Hamminkeln, the British 6th Airborne Division landed on 6 zones and encountered heavy German anti-aircraft and small arms fire during the drop itself. In spite of this, once the division was on the ground, enemy resistance quickly crumbled, so much so that at 13:30, The headquarters of the 6th Airborne reported that all 3 of its brigades had secured their objectives, including the successful capture of Hamminkeln and 3 intact bridges across the River Isel. Simultaneously, on the 6th Airborne's southern flank, the US 17th Airborne Division dropped onto 4 zones between Hamminkeln and Wiesel. Much like their British counterparts, the American paratroopers faced heavy enemy fire during the fly-in, which caused elements of the 17th to land slightly off course from their designated drop and landing zones. Nonetheless, the division quickly formed up, overcame what German resistance there was, and by late afternoon on the 24th of March, it had secured all but one of its D-Day objectives. Thus, within a matter of hours, the entire 18th Airborne Corps was on the ground and consolidating its positions, with 3,500 German prisoners of war having been taken, and the 17th Airborne alone capturing or destroying over 50 enemy tanks and artillery pieces. In discussing the success of Operation Varsity, a report by the 18th Corps highlights that the impact of the airborne divisions at one blow completely shattered the hostile defence. The rapid deepening of the bridgehead materially increased the rapidity of bridging operations, which in turn greatly increased the rate of build-up on the east bank, so essential to subsequent successes. The airborne drop was of such depth that all enemy artillery and rear defensive positions were included and destroyed, reducing in one day a position that might have taken many days to reduce by ground attack only. One of the consequences of Varsity was that the German 84th Infantry Division found itself trapped between the airborne troops in its rear and the 15th Scottish Division to its front. As a result, the 84th was unable to put up more than a token defence of the Deersfort area, and it wasn't long before the British ground troops linked up with the 17th Airborne at 1400, and then with the 6th Airborne at 1515. At the same time, the 15th Division was beginning to make satisfactory progress on its left, where Law, Overcamp, Haffen and Mayer were in British hands at 1800 on the 24th of March 1945. Meanwhile, just a few kilometres to the southeast, over on the right flank of the 21st Army Group, the American 9th Army enjoyed the greatest success of Operation Plunder, where it carried out arguably one of the most successful river crossings of the entire war. Preceded by heavy bombardment involving 2,070 artillery pieces, 9th Army's part in Plunder commenced at 0200 on the 24th of March, when its American 16th Corps, commanded by General John Anderson, started to cross the Rhine to the north of Rheinberg. Here, the 30th Infantry Division assaulted with all 3 of its regiments forward, and it was at first light on the 24th that the towns of Spielen, Ork and Meirum were secured and in American hands. At all 3 places, German resistance had been minimal, with most, if not all of their defences, having been silenced during 9th Army's preliminary artillery bombardment, as the US official history details. The mammoth artillery preparation has silenced at least some German guns, and apparently had cut all telephone wires. Since few German forward observers had radios, they had no way to call for fire. Daylight was at hand before the first German shelling in appreciable amounts struck the crossing sites. There could be no question from the first that the 30th Division had staged a strikingly successful crossing of the sprawling Rhine. 1 hour after 30th Division's assault, 16th Corps effected a second crossing of the Rhine at 0300 on the 24th, when the 79th Infantry Division assaulted with 2 regiments in the vicinity of Walsum. Once again, the American artillery had dealt with most of the German positions in this sector, and besides navigational difficulties from an early morning mist, the men in the 79th made good progress inland, so that by 0800 a bridgehead running from Amstadt to Walsum had been achieved. With its 2 forward divisions across, the 16th Corps pressed east to enlarge its foothold over the Rhine, and at 1900 Dinslaken fell to the 79th Division, whilst the 30th spent the remainder of the day clearing a series of railway lines around Vardar, and eventually ending up on the outskirts of Bruckhausen. By midnight on the 24th of March 1945, the American 9th Army had a bridgehead over the Rhine some 10 kilometres deep and 12 kilometres wide, with an estimated 2,200 German soldiers having been captured, and the opposing German 180th Infantry Division having ceased to function as a fighting formation. In summing up its own casualties for the day, the history of the 9th Army states, due in large measure to the overwhelming artillery preparation and supporting fires delivered during the attack, our casualties have been remarkably light, 41 killed, 450 wounded and 7 missing. A wounded soldier evacuated back across the Rhine a few hours after the assault crossing, when asked how the fight was going, replied with enthusiasm, "We caught 'em with their pants down." And so, at the close of D-Day of Operation Plunder, the 21st Army Group had achieved its primary objectives. The Rhine had been forced, 2 field armies were on the far side, Bailey bridges were under construction, follow-up units were being ferried across, and the key road centres of Hamminkeln, Wiesel and Dinslaken had been secured. That said, much work still had to be done over the next week before a breakout into northern Germany was achieved. On the front of 2nd Army, German paratroopers continued to hold on to Reyes until the morning of the 26th of March, when the 51st Highland Division eliminated the last pocket of enemy resistance in the town. That same day, the 12th and 30th Corps joined hands with each other, and the 18th Airborne Corps, after repelling a series of counterattacks, advanced east towards a nearby Autobahn, thereby broadening the Allied position around Wiesel. Unfortunately, in 9th Army's sector, the lightning advance seen on the first day of the offensive began to lose its pace, as German reinforcements, including elements of the 190th Infantry, the 2nd Fallschirmjäger and 116th Panzer Divisions, were deployed into the line opposite the 16th Corps. Together, these 3 divisions frustrated 9th Army's attempt to force an early breakthrough to Dorsten, and instead the Americans were drawn into a protracted fight in dense wooded terrain that was both muddy and intersected by a poor road network. Despite this, the Allies edged their way forward, and on the 27th of March, the 2nd and 9th Armies established firm contact with one another near the town of Krudenberg, thus creating one continuous bridgehead east of the Rhine. The next day, the 28th, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery declared that the 21st Army Group had won the Battle of the Rhine, and by the 31st of March 1945, Emmerich, Eiselberg, Bocholt, Borken, Dorsten and Gladbeck had all been captured, whilst there was now 3 Canadian, 11 British and 8 American divisions over the Rhine and operating in the bridgehead. These formations were further augmented by 1 Canadian and 5 British independent brigades, and 17 American separate tank and tank destroyer battalions. In contrast, the German army was only able to muster 10 divisions in front of the 21st Army Group, some of which, such as the 84th and 180th Infantry Divisions, were significantly under strength and in need of replacement. The history of the British 2nd Army concludes. The German armies were quite unable to cope with the weight of the attack, the speed with which it developed, and the rapid build-up of an overwhelming strength. Within a week of the assault, all initial objectives had been gained, the defence lines of the enemy had been broken, and 2nd Army was 40 miles on from the river. It was estimated that 30,000 casualties were inflicted on the enemy during these operations, while in the period the 24th of March to the 31st of March, 2nd Army incurred losses to the extent of 233 officers and 2,941 other ranks. It was now apparent that a breakthrough had started. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe so that you never miss one of my future videos.